soliciting sob stories from bloated bureaucrats with six-figure salaries. Give me a break.
We need to be fighting right now. Donald Trump is shutting down whole parts of our government.
House Democrats will not provide a single vote to this reckless Republican budget.
Republicans do not have the votes to keep government open on our own. If the Democrats want to shut it down, they can.
Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Tonight on America Decides, budget nail-biter. House Republicans decided this would be budget resolution week. Yesterday, Speaker Johnson asked for prayers. Today, there were invocations about the moral imperatives of getting fiscal sanity returned to Washington, leaving this question hovering over the entire process. Do Republican leaders in the House have sufficient votes to pass their multi-trillion-dollar budget blueprint? Stay tuned. Part of that conversation, how potential cuts to Medicaid could impact that outcome, and with it, much of the future of the Trump economic agenda.
I'm not sure why you're confused or why it's so hard to answer what 5 things you've done in the past week.
Continued confusion as Elon Musk tries a second time to obtain from federal workers an answer to this question. What did you do last week? A list of 5 bullet points. Theoretically, if it's not submitted by tonight, midnight, those federal workers who don't comply might be fired. The White House says 1 million federal workers have already completed this task. Question, is it mandatory? This is a day that ends in Y, so as you might expect, President Trump signed more executive orders. Today, his focus was on copper, possibly placing tariffs on imports for the metal used in modern-day aircrafts, vehicles, ships, and other military hardware. I want to start tonight here at the desk with Aaron Navarro and Scott McFarland. Aaron, I want to talk to you first about 21 people who worked in something related to the Department of Government Efficiency who resigned today in what read to me like protest of what they're observing and what they no longer want to be associated with.
Yeah, that's right. These are 21 anonymous employees who are working in what is now known
They're
as...
real people.
Yes.
They just didn't release their names.
Correct. What is now known as the U.S. DOGE Services Department. They used to be in what was called the United States Digital Services Department, which was renamed DOGE on Trump's first day in office. So these are holdovers. These are not what you've heard of the 20-year-old software engineers that are making these cuts at DOGE. These were people that had already been there, and agency that really supplements the digital services of a lot of federal agencies. And in their letter, they lined out why they believe they cannot help DOGE in their effort. They said, quote, "We will not lend our expertise to carry out or legitimize DOGE's actions." And they also detailed how the day after Trump was inaugurated, White House officials came and did 15-minute interviews with people in this office, asking them to identify themselves, asking them about political loyalty, kind of showing where DOGE, formerly USDS and Digital Services, was heading.
And it sounded as if they are alarmed about some of the things that they have observed that the younger parts of the Department of Government Efficiency are undertaking in terms of federal data security and other aspects of their maneuvering around.
And they write that they were going to be integrated a bit more fully into that effort. And these, at least according to the list of anonymous employees, a lot of them were engineers. So on the technical aspect, would be used and utilized to carry out the mission Elon Musk has set for DOGE.
And about this to-do list, what does the White House have to say about that?
Well, in the Oval Office just now, President Trump said if employees don't write back, they will end up eventually losing their jobs. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, seemed to again say that it is up to federal agency heads to determine what respondents, non-respondents, the fate for them. But again, federal agencies have DOGE employees within them. They're the ones identifying the cuts. I kind of don't believe that a federal agency head would buck the president or DOGE workers when it comes to time to potentially terminate these workers.
We shall see. Scott, this is a time of many overhaul efforts within the Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. What is most on your mind this afternoon?
Well, the instability is itself a problem. If you have a bunch of new bosses coming into any workplace, there's going to be a little instability. If you have a whole wave of new rules coming into a workplace, there's going to be some instability. But this is different. This is of a different magnitude, Major. We have FBI agents telling us that they're worried any minute now that email is going to pop up in their inbox, that they've been put on leave or that they've been fired because of either retaliation for being part of the January 6th investigation or because of changes at the top and reassignments that come from there. It's hard to function as an FBI agent, as a public health official, as somebody there trying to watch out for security threats or risks if you're worried about your job every few minutes. And that in itself is becoming a problem. The inability to know where you're going to be tomorrow destabilizes the Justice Department, and you don't want the Department of Justice necessarily to be focused on things other than chasing terrorists, child predators, and violent gangs.
And remind the audience what experience Kash Patel as the head of the FBI and Dan Bongino, now Deputy Director of the FBI, bring to the Bureau itself.
Well, they bring a mandate to be change agents, and they bring brands as change agents and people who are going to execute
who've said a lot of things about the FBI but never actually been in it until now.
And that's distinctive. Neither has any FBI experience. You know how rare it is to have the top two officials with no FBI experience? Never happened before in 117 years of the Bureau's existence. That's caused concern among some of the current agents. In fact, Major, the FBI Agents Association, which represents current agents, had pleaded with Kash Patel to install somebody with institutional memory into the number 2 position because that person has their fingerprints all over the day-to-day operations. That didn't happen. So there's the potential. More turnover, more retirements, more resignations due to the culture change here.
Very quickly, Brian Driscoll, there's some drama about him. Who is he and what's the drama?
He was the acting FBI director before Kash Patel and pushed back on that request from the Department of Justice and Trump's allies to collect all the names of the FBI agents who were part of the January 6th investigations. We're waiting to see what happens with him if he still has a home at the FBI now that Kash Patel's in charge.
Scott MacFarlane, Aaron Navarro, thank you very much. If Speaker Mike Johnson wants to pass the Trump-backed budget bill, which he most certainly does, and that includes trillions in tax cuts and other policy changes, he can only afford to lose one Republican vote. However, as we speak, multiple Republican lawmakers have already said they are no on the budget resolution, or, this is an important distinction, leaning no. Caitlin Huey-Burns joins us now from Capitol Hill. What does it look like right now, Caitlin, on the vote and where they are?
Yeah, Major. Well, as of now, which is about 5:06 p.m., Speaker Johnson does not have the votes. And I note the time code there because we have been watching outside his office as members have been coming in and out all day long. Some of them have actually even been talking to President Trump, placing calls to Trump to gauge how he's feeling on this bill. I asked Speaker Johnson a little bit about that, and he said that Trump is essentially whipping the votes for this and trying to get members on board. So we'll see tonight whether this vote happens at all. Earlier in the day, Speaker Johnson said that we would just have to stay tuned. It could or could not. But the reason why everybody should care about this budget resolution, which is really just a framework, is because this is the first real test for Congress. If you've been wondering where Congress has been for the past several weeks of the Trump administration as the president issues executive order after executive order, well, here is where Congress fits into all of this. The president wants big priorities, immigration, tax cuts extended, a lot of other items. Those have to actually be funded by Congress. And so here is where they come to play. But you can obviously understand why the president wants to go it alone as much as he can, because the House has such a slim margin that in order to pass something as basic as the budget takes all of this wrangling. And so, as you mentioned, he really doesn't, Speaker Johnson doesn't have much margin for error. So if they have a vote tonight, that will give us an indication that they have the votes. If it's punted, they kind of have to go back to the drawing board here.
And when you schedule a vote for Tuesday, that gives you much of the remainder of the week to wrangle things out if you need to. So there's some space for the House Republican leadership to intervene if they need to. You mentioned funding a second ago, Caitlin. I want to ask you about something that is adjacent to the budget resolution conversation, which is funding the government to avoid a shutdown middle of next month.
Yeah, that's right. I think lost in all of this is that the government runs out of money in a few weeks. And this is a separate piece of legislation that this Congress would have to pass. If you talk to members up here, they know that deadline's there. But as you well know from covering too many of these over the past several years, they really wait until the deadline to do it. Now, members on both sides on the appropriations committees have been meeting. They're trying to settle on a basic number to get to, but there are also some real disagreements. I mean, Democrats want Republicans to push the White House to stop freezing federal spending, and Republicans don't want to do that. They want to give the president some deference here to administer some of these things that we're seeing from DOGE. So there is a little bit of conflict there, and we'll wait to see over the next couple of weeks if they can get to that. But that is, of course, another item kind of hanging in the balance. The Senate Majority Leader John Thune suggested today that we may be in a position likely to just have to do another continuing resolution or a short-term budget bill to kind of get through further kicking the can down the road.
And Caitlin, briefly, when the Speaker and the House Republican leaders deal with those Republicans who are either no or lean no, what are the concerns most frequently expressed by those in the no coalition, either lean or hard no?
Well, those who are holding out say that this doesn't cut government funding enough and that it adds to the deficit. And so if Speaker Johnson were to go back and try to get additional funding if this bill doesn't pass, what does that do to some of the more moderate Republican members who are leaning towards this bill but had major concerns, some of them, about what kind of spending cuts would occur, how you would pay for them? Because one solution is to cut into Medicaid. And I asked Speaker Johnson about that today. Can you unequivocally say that there won't be further cuts to Medicaid? And he said they really want to focus on waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicaid. So take that with however you want to take that. But that signals to me that they have to find savings somewhere. How they get there could come at a serious cost, and this is such a fragile coalition.
Caitlin Huey-Burns on Capitol Hill with all the details. Thank you so much. The House budget plan includes trillions of dollars in spending cuts, roughly $2 trillion over 10 years. Republican Congressman Dusty Johnson joins us next to talk about the programs that might be impacted and the economic benefits that might accrue. You're watching America Decide. Welcome back. Quick fact check here. The House budget plan includes recommendation language that could lead to significant reductions in future Medicaid spending. It directs the committee that oversees the program, that's the Energy and Commerce Committee, to look for up to $880 billion in reductions over 10 years. Even so, House Speaker Mike Johnson made it sound today like that wasn't actually the case. Listen.
The leader just held up the resolution. Do a word search for yourself. It doesn't even mention Medicaid in the bill, so that's important part.
South Dakota Republican Congressman Dusty Johnson joins us now. Congressman, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. You know and I know that the Speaker is technically correct, that Medicaid isn't in the budget resolution, but the instructions are there. Many of your colleagues are nervous about the implications for future Medicaid funding. Do you share their concerns?
Major, we can get to $880 billion of cuts within the jurisdiction of Energy and Commerce without cutting Medicare services, Medicaid services that people are receiving today. That can absolutely be done.
How do you do that?
Telling you otherwise, well, I'm going to give you an example from SNAP. That's the welfare program I know better, but all of the same lessons can be the same in Medicaid. So, for instance, I have a bill I introduced yesterday to strengthen the work requirements around able-bodied young people who are receiving food stamps or SNAP. Now, this is not pregnant mothers. These are not seniors. These are not folks with disabilities. These are just people, people who can work and who choose not to. You can save $100 billion a year on SNAP just by having better work requirements for the able-bodied. The same can be true in Medicaid. One more example from SNAP. You've got states that have used ridiculous loopholes to exempt their entire state from the work requirements in SNAP. Closing those loopholes can save you $50 billion. And so you absolutely can start to build cost savings on integrity and on making sure that the wrong people don't get benefits. We absolutely need to have Medicaid. It's an incredibly powerful program. It should be focused on America's most needy.
Congressman, I was sent a couple of notes today by the National Rural Health Association. They've been up on Capitol Hill. I may be talking to you, but certainly talking to other of your colleagues. And they said to me that in South Dakota, 50% of the rural hospitals there are financially stressed. They're facing workforce shortages, and they're uncertain about federal grants continuing under the Trump administration or this budget resolution. Are you saying that none of their concerns are valid?
What I'm saying is that right now, all we're doing with this vote this week is to unlock the budget, the reconciliation process. The resolution in and of itself doesn't do anything. In and of itself, it doesn't cut a dollar. All it does is the kickoff for the 4 quarters of the football game to come. And that's, listen, of course, they need to be their own advocates. Rural hospitals are incredibly important, and we want to make sure in the final reconciliation work product that we are not closing rural hospitals. This vote today does not affect rural hospitals directly at all.
What is your sense right now, this evening, as we speak a little bit after 5 p.m. Eastern, on where the votes are and if it will actually pass this evening?
We're making progress, but it is admittedly progress at a pretty slow pace. I've never been able to find 219 people to agree on anything. And of course, that's the situation we're in. We got to have 218 out of 219. And it's going to be difficult. I'm not going to lie to you, but I don't think failure is an option. And I think most members who are coming around to our side understand that we are $2 trillion upside down every single year. And there will be people who can tell you that, oh, if Republicans just raised taxes on the rich, we could solve the problem. The reality is that Joe Biden's billionaire's tax would only generate $50 billion a year, and we are $2,000 billion a year upside down. There are people who want these cuts to come only from discretionary spending. You know as well as I do that you could literally zero out non-defense discretionary spending, and you wouldn't even cut the deficit annually in half. And so I get it. There are people who are uncomfortable anytime brave men and women step up and want to make bold decisions to put us on the right path. The reality is that bankruptcy, insolvency beckons. And it is time for the big boys and the big girls to step up and vote yes tonight or tomorrow or whenever that gosh darn thing is on the floor.
Whenever that gosh darn thing is on the floor. That's been said many times in the House of Representatives. Speaking of the bravery that you just mentioned, President Trump has been pretty clear about Medicare. He doesn't want to touch Medicare, yet there has been extensive reporting, really excellent reporting from the Wall Street Journal about Medicare Advantage, overcharging, doctors, hospitals manipulating the system, lots of discernible fraud built into that system. Why not go after that also?
Sometimes when people say, whether it's the president or whether it's a Republican member, when they say, we're not going to touch Medicare, what they mean is we're not going to touch the Medicare benefits. We're not going to touch, or same thing with Social Security. Of course, we can't do Social Security and reconciliation.
Right,
but if somebody says we're not going to touch Social Security, what they mean is the actual benefit received by the senior. We should absolutely be willing to look at waste, fraud, and abuse. If there are hospitals or providers who are engaging in bad behavior, we should hold them accountable. That's an integrity measure, not a benefit cut. And I would be hopeful that whether it's Medicare or Medicaid or anything else, we would look for waste, fraud, and abuse, root it out, and end it.
Dusty Johnson, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
U.S. is asking for access to Ukraine's rare earth minerals in exchange for continuing support in Ukraine's war against Russia. Next, why these minerals, you've heard a lot about them the last couple of weeks, are so coveted, not just by the Trump administration, but lots of other global powers. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Well, welcome back to America Decides. Just a few moments ago in the Oval Office, President Trump said he is open to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visiting Washington later this week to sign a deal that would grant U.S. access to Ukraine's mineral reserves. This is what the president said Ukraine would receive in exchange.
$350 billion and lots of equipment, and military equipment, and the right to fight on.
This comes just one day after Russian President Vladimir Putin said he is open to selling minerals from both Russia and Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine to the Trump administration. Trump said purchasing these minerals from him is, that is to say Putin, not out of the question. Gracelyn Bhaskaran is the director of Critical Minerals Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Gracelyn, it's great to have you at the desk. Thank you so much for being here. CBS News hasn't confirmed something, but you believe you have some understood language about what's been agreed to between the United States and Ukraine. What is it?
President Trump and Zelensky reached an agreement earlier this afternoon on a minerals deal. It's the first of its kind.
Wow.
And the minerals deal looks a bit different to where we started. Originally, President Trump had said he wanted $500 million to be repaid for former military assistance that had been provided. And President Zelensky said, we didn't get $500 billion.
They didn't.
No, it's closer to, I think, in the ballpark of $128 billion.
Correct.
So we've seen that $500 billion figure disappear.
Okay.
We've also not seen a security guarantee. President Zelensky was hoping to have a security guarantee included in it. It didn't. Instead, it's a very high level of agreement that basically says that they will set up a fund for future monetizable assets where 50% of the revenue will go into this fund, and that can be used to fund things like future reconstruction of Ukraine. There's a lot of unknowns that are left at a high level, like will we jointly develop assets? Hasn't really been ironed out.
So, as I understand it, there are some things in Ukraine of interest to the United States. Lithium, graphite, titanium, zirconium, things like antimony, gallium, germanium. These are all things necessary for either weapons or high-tech equipment. I'm generalizing, correct? Those are all the things that we're sort of interested in.
You got it exactly right.
Okay. They're hard to get to. Mining takes a long time, and it's expensive to find them. And do we even know how much of these things Ukraine actually has?
You're asking the exact questions that I think a lot of the private sector is asking. We're relying on data that's 30 to 60 years old and that was generated by the Soviet Union. At that time, technology which was much older. Some of the minerals that we talked about for advanced semiconductors were not things that we were thinking about as being particularly important. And importantly is we basically have made an agreement with very little data. So you've seen this to largely be a government conversation without the private sector.
And let's be candid. This war has ravaged Ukraine on many levels, among them infrastructure. And having read your reports on this, you can mine all you want, but if you don't have the means by which to move the materials through infrastructure that is reliable and resilient, you don't have much.
Absolutely. Transportation infrastructure is really important, but even energy. I mean, close to 1/5 of the world's energy is used on the mining industry. And a lot of this energy infrastructure was bombed out during...
Intentionally by Russia.
Very intentionally. So not only do I have to build a mine and take the risk of developing a mine, I now have to finance significant infrastructure development to actually make these resources monetizable.
It's interesting yesterday, French President Emmanuel Macron was asked if France would be comfortable with this kind of arrangement. And he said yes, because it would be a very good security agreement for Ukraine. The United States would have a vested interest in wanting to maintain its deal with Ukraine. Therefore, that would suggest it was interested in its long-term sovereignty and its protection. Is that implied, do you think, in this kind of conversation, whatever they've signed or agreed to?
The hope is that there would be security guarantee, but I can tell you that the private sector feels a little bit differently, as without intentional, explicit agreements about long-term security. The electoral cycle is only 4 years long. It takes 18 years to develop a mine, and on average globally, and then the mine can run for another 30 to 80 years. So we're talking about a period that is much longer than the security guarantee of one United States president. And that's where an explicit written guarantee is more valuable than the implicit guarantee, because already this agreement supersedes any trade agreement we have with Ukraine.
And if I hear you correctly, those who would be in the private sector and want to develop this want to see that in print. They want to know what they're getting themselves into before they plunge all these many millions or hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever it costs to try to extract these minerals.
Absolutely. I mean, as you opened with, Putin is already negotiating with minerals on Russian-occupied land. So it's, the private sector is kind of stepping back and saying, how do we know there's not more land that he's going to occupy and try to negotiate minerals with? So there's already this counter precedent of negotiating with minerals on occupied land.
Graceland Bascarand, I don't think you could have had a better guest to help us understand this or actually pull back some of the curtains on what may have been agreed to. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
21 DOGE, that's Department of Government Efficiency employees, have resigned today in protest against actions taken by the new agency. Our political panel will dig into this and other topics. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back. As federal workers try to work through what feels to them like a confusing atmosphere about job cuts and demands from the Department of Government Efficiency, otherwise known as DOGE, the man once tapped to be sort of a co-captain of that agency. Well, yesterday he announced he's running for governor of Ohio. Vivek Ramaswamy declared his candidacy yesterday. Very soon thereafter, both President Trump and Elon Musk endorsed Ramaswamy. Let's bring in our political panel. Liza Acevedo formerly served as Director of Communications for former Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff. Lance Trover, spokesperson for the 2024 presidential campaign of then Governor, now Interior Secretary Doug Burgum. It's both great to have you both here. I want to play for you some sound from the Oval Office from just a little bit ago. President Trump making it clear that this email that went out about your 5 things I accomplished last week and the possible implications of it is not a brand new thing. They've been thinking about it for a while. Let's listen.
In some cases, they're not writing back. And if they don't write back, they end up eventually losing their job. We give them extensions, but, that was something we thought about a long time ago. We give them extensions, but we'll see.
We thought about it a long time ago. So, Lance, this looks like another effort to cull the federal workforce and at least be able to blame those in the federal workforce who don't respond for their own termination. Self-imposed termination, probably the president will describe it as.
Well, look, I mean, I think there have been a few missteps along the way, but if you look at the broader effort of DOGE, and we saw the Harvard poll that came out yesterday, and we saw 72% of the country is on board with the idea of DOGE and something like this. So I don't think, in terms of like what's going on, we have a fun time discussing what's going on here in Washington, and it's a little confusing for the federal workers. I think publicly, if we're looking at the broader spectrum of the American public, they're not really worried about the details and getting into it. They just like the fact to see that something is actually going on and we're getting the government reduced.
Liza, the Republican governor of Virginia has said we need to do something about our federal workforce. He's put up a website to offer ideas about how to gussy up your resume, find job linkages. Other House Republicans have said words like there needs to be more compassion, needs to be more empathy, more order, to pick up Lance's point of view. How do you evaluate the politics of this so far? Yes, there's a Harvard poll, but Lance, as you well know, there are other polls that are not as robustly thumbs up as the Harvard poll.
Well, I'll just call it like I see it. He's playing both sides of the fence.
That is to say the president.
The president and the governor of Virginia, the governor of Virginia went out and he said publicly, well, there are going to be some losses, there are going to be some cuts that are made, and I support Elon Musk's efforts and I support Donald Trump's efforts, and they need to continue moving forward. Then he goes ahead and he launches this website. So he is playing both sides of the fence. Let me tell you something. I've spoken to federal employees inside the government right now. Morale is completely low. People are considering applying for new jobs because of the current situation that's taking place. And you are seeing the reaction from individuals, right? You're seeing these Republican town halls. You're seeing people are showing up and they're furious. I read somewhere the other day that there was an IRS worker who voted for Donald Trump, and now he's out of a job. So this is having real life implications on people.
And Lance, your former boss when he was a candidate, now he's the Interior Secretary. Have you had any conversations with him about the effect this is or isn't having on the Interior Department?
Yeah, no, I'm not going to talk about conversations I have with the Interior Secretary. I'll let him speak for himself when it comes to all that stuff. But to your point about Glenn Youngkin, I mean, he would also be criticized as the governor of that state if he weren't doing something to help out people who were getting, let go as well. I just want to flag that. If he weren't doing it, the Democrats will be all over him for not doing anything.
What do you think, to your point a moment ago, Lance, about the bottom line trickle-down effects of this are politically? Because 80% of the federal workforce does not live in Washington, D.C., Virginia, or Maryland. There are about 5 million federal contractors who are not part of the federal workforce, but they're recipients of federal grant money in one way or another. And they're distributed all over the country, in Trump states and in Harris states. Do you think there are any potential downstream negative consequences of this government drawdown of the federal workforce or contractors?
Yeah, look, you would call me crazy if I didn't sit here and say yes. Is there potential down the road for that to happen? Of course, that's the potential to happen. But if you're the Trump administration, you have to move fast and you have to move hard. You have to do what Elon Musk says. Yeah, we're going to break things, but if we find things that shouldn't be broken, we're going to fix them. And that's kind of how they're operating. But I don't see any other way for them to operate, because the slower you go, the more this bureaucracy will slow them down even further. The courts are going to decide a lot of this. And I think that's what they understand that. So I think for them, it's like they know they're not going to get everything, but you got to go hard and fast and get what you can get now and see how it shakes out in the end.
Liza, I am by several orders of magnitude the oldest person at this table. I remember reinventing government. I covered it when I covered Capitol Hill, when Bill Clinton and Vice President Gore were in charge of the federal bureaucracy. And over a 6-year period, lots of people associated with reinventing government would tell you they trimmed the federal workforce over 6 years by 600,000 employees.
Sure.
It can be done, and done in a way that reimagines what is the necessary size of the federal workforce. If they can cut 600,000, why can't Trump cut 100,000?
Oh, they can absolutely make cuts, right? But it's the way that you do it that matters. And it's about just, do you send a notice to somebody and say in 24 hours you're going to be laid off and not have a job anymore? Or do you go about it a different way, right? And I think, again, you're seeing people are getting very, very frustrated with exactly how the Trump administration is performing right now. And let me be very clear. The Republicans have a slim majority in the House. And I think they need to be very careful with the actions that they're taking when it comes to the midterms.
And to that point, Lance, one of the things that those who remember that period of time will tell you is there was a process. They went to Congress, and that's how this thing stuck. That's how the things that the Clinton administration set in motion actually lasted and weren't tripped up by legal challenges. Shouldn't the White House do that?
Well, again, I mean, you make a good point. I mean, the House has a 1-seat majority. But again, I think you have a very different view of presidential authority that Donald Trump has versus the Clinton administration. And so they're going to be more expansive. Yeah, it absolutely is more expansive. And that's how Donald Trump has always been from his first term in office to where he is now. And I think he feels empowered to step forward because of his big win in November.
Liza Acevedo, Lance Trovers, that's, you see, you're Lance, you're Liza.
And we both work for Doug's. Did you get that?
That's right.
Yeah.
Look, I can only take so much. Great to have you with us. Thanks very much. I appreciate it. Apprehensions of migrants attempting to enter the United States unlawfully at the southern border, well, those numbers are plummeting. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez has the details from Sunland Park, New Mexico.
It is quiet here at the U.S.-Mexico border, where illegal crossings are down by more than 90% from the same time last year. In fact, over the weekend, the Department of Homeland Security reported the lowest single-day tally in migrant crossings here in 15 years. And we have been riding with Border Patrol here in the El Paso sector of the border, and we have yet to see migrants. We have seen Border Patrol agents, vehicles, barriers, and National Guard soldiers, as well as DOD personnel, but no migrants so far. And we have been riding for hours trying to better understand why there has been a dramatic drop in apprehensions. And of course, the Trump administration would say that their immigration crackdown and their tougher policies here at the border are having the intended impact and are fueling this dramatic reduction in illegal immigration here. But the open question is how long this lull in illegal border crossings will last for. Back to you.
On the scene for us, Camilo Montoya Galvez, thank you very much. 5 years after COVID, experts say we may not be ready for the next pandemic. We'll explain why the Trump administration's current efforts to cut things within the federal government might affect negatively our preparedness. That's next. You're watching America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Thanks so much for staying with us. Bird flu, as it is called, is spreading through thousands of animals and has reached some humans. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has tracked 70 cases thus far and 1 death in the United States. Around 700 people have been laid off from the CDC in recent weeks due to cuts from the Trump administration. And some public health experts are expressing concern that those job reductions might make us less prepared for the next pandemic. Science writer David Quammen joins us now. He is the author of the book Breathless, The Scientific Race to Defeat a Deadly Virus. Importantly, in 2012, he also is the author of a book entitled Spillover, animal infections, and the next human pandemic. So, David, you are deeply experienced in this area of research and writing. What is our current risk factor associated with bird flu and our ability at the federal level to properly measure it, explain it, and combat it?
Well, our current risk level, according to the CDC website that I looked at today, is low. The issue is how easy is it for that risk level to move from low to high in a minute, in a day, in 2 days. The cuts that we've all been hearing about to the CDC, to the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease, to the NIH, what concerns me about those cuts is the timing, the scale, and the focus of those cuts. As you mentioned, we are living in a rain of bird flu coming down out of the skies from wild birds onto poultry farms in the U.S., onto dairy farms in the U.S. now, as well as a lot of other outbreaks around the world. It's a really bad time for us to be reducing our capacity for scientific research, vaccine development, and public health measures.
And David, in that regard, I've read and talked to experts about bird flu who say one of the problems right now is we are not aggressively enough testing in various states to understand exactly how widespread this problem may be. We don't even know what we don't know yet, and because we don't know, we haven't made any decisions about ramping up vaccines to be prepared. Do those things concern you as well?
Absolutely. Those are high concerns for me. How much are we testing poultry workers who are exposed to bird flu when they work with hundreds and thousands of birds? How much are we testing dairy workers who are exposed to bird flu in all of the more than 900 dairy herds in the U.S. that have bird flu circulating in the cows? How much are we testing milk? How much are we testing the cows themselves? All of this should be very intensively tested, and it is not being done. There has just been a second strain of bird flu found in cows just in recent weeks, independently spilled over from wild birds into cows, and we know almost nothing about where it is and what it's doing.
And David, remind the audience of the risk factor of viruses that move through animals and then mutate into humans and the potential difficulty of treating humans so infected.
Well, Major, this is where most of our infectious diseases come from. 70% of our infectious disease in the strict recent sense come from other animals, come from mostly wild animals. Those diseases, in particular viruses, spill over into humans. There's a whole drumbeat of these events that have happened in the last few decades. I wrote about them in the books that you mentioned. Ebola virus, Marburg virus, SARS-1 in 2003, Nipah virus in 1998, Hendra virus in 1994, and others. Marburg virus, coming out of wild animals, getting into humans, novel viruses that haven't been seen in humans before, for which we need to respond. One way we respond is by developing vaccines as quickly as possible, and that's what saved millions of lives in the COVID-19 pandemic. We developed vaccines against COVID-19 at a record pace, and it was one of the few things that was done really, really well during the COVID pandemic.
And David, we have about a minute left. When COVID struck, there was a consensus. Oh my gosh, we were flat-footed. We're never going to be this flat-footed again. If I'm hearing you correctly, with bird flu, our feet are flat.
Our feet are flatter than ever. I'm really concerned. I think we are less prepared for a pandemic now than we were in January of 2020. The one thing that's improved is our vaccine research and development, the mRNA vaccine technology that was brought online by U.S. scientists and U.S. public health people and private sector U.S. pharmaceutical people so quickly. We have that, but otherwise we are blinding ourselves to the disease threats that we are facing now.
David Quammen, thank you very much for your time and your expertise, sir. I appreciate it. U.S. Secret Service Director Sean Curran was with President Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, that harrowing afternoon when there was an assassination attempt. In an exclusive interview with CBS News, Sean Curran opened up about that experience. You'll hear more about that next, right here on America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Before his appointment last month, U.S. Secret Service Director Sean Curran served as the special agent in charge of then-candidate, of course, former President Trump's security detail. This matters a great deal because Curran and several other agents sprung into action to shield the former president during that first assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania. That is him, Curran, in the black sunglasses, frame right. Curran spoke to our Jennifer Jacobs about that experience and other things in an exclusive interview. Jennifer joins me at the table now. Jennifer, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us. What are Sean Curran's memories of that moment, and has he fully come to terms with everything that moment meant for him and the former president?
That's a great question. I tried to get him to share some recollections of the incident and what it was like to have bullets flying at people, including at him and at the former president at the time. He said that he has not fully processed all of it. He didn't seem all that interested in talking about it and really dwelling on it. He said he just moved immediately into planning for the GOP convention, which, as you know, Donald Trump is one of the most controversial people possibly on the planet. It takes a lot of planning. He has a very hectic schedule. So the Secret Service agents who form his protective detail are very, very busy. So Curran told me that he just hasn't had time to process it. He has barely thought about it. He's also very protective of information about the president. He doesn't like to speak out of turn. I tried to get him to convey to me a little bit about the president's injuries or things that the president said on the way to the hospital, things like that. He just was not willing to reveal what agents call limo talk. They're very careful to keep those things secret and private. It's just for their ears only. They just don't repeat what they're hearing from their protectees. And discretion is a valuable part of that relationship between a president, a protectee, and the detail. They spend a lot of time together, and that idea that that is a vault in essence is important to every president I've covered. Speaking of that, though, they do have a relationship. A close relationship. Describe that in his words to you. Yeah, I was a little bit surprised by that. He talked about how much he cares for the president, and he said he felt compelled to say it's not like a political affiliation that he has with him, but it's a bond that they've created over 7 years. He was on Trump's first term on Trump's detail when Trump was president the first time. Then he was with Trump throughout the entire 4 years when Trump was out of office. He was with Trump to all these legal hearings, which were, there were countless legal hearings and all the criminal and non-criminal cases. And Sean Curran was at his side, walking behind him for all of these. So in fact, he mentioned that there was some planning by the Secret Service leadership about what to do if President Trump were sent to prison if he were convicted. And there were some discussions about sending a detail in. And Curran said, if I had to go in, I would be going in with him and be spending time in that prison in order to protect him. Because in one case, the president was convicted. In New York, he was. The sentencing was held in abeyance and the election was conducted. Former President Trump, as we all know, won. And he was ultimately required to serve no prison time. But the Secret Service, and Sean Curran told you, had to think about this, not just at an abstract level. Right. They talked about, they had some very serious discussions, he said, about how that would go about, how they would possibly just consider the prison to be a site like any other presidential site where they're protecting a protectee, and they would have just gone in there. And he said he actually joked to President Trump something about we might be spending an awful lot more time together in very tight quarters. Very tight quarters indeed. Jennifer Jacobs, exclusive interview. Sean Curran, the current director of the Secret Service. Thank you very much. That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.